There is a photograph on my refrigerator. It has been there for 11 years. A little girl with dark curls. Laughing. Her arms are wrapped around a woman. That woman is not me. I am the one who carried her. I am the one who felt her move in the dark. I am the one who gave her a name, even though I was told not to. And I am the one who signed the paper. The one that said, she belongs to someone else now. Most days I walk past that photograph without stopping. But some days I stop. And I stand there for a long time, asking myself if I made the right choice. My name is Patricia. Most people call me Pat. I am 63 years old, and I live alone in a house in western Pennsylvania, the same house where I grew up, the same house where my mother used to bake bread on Sunday mornings, and where the radiators still clank and hiss when the heat comes on in October. I have lived here most of my adult life, except for a few years when I was young and thought I was going to be someone different. I want to tell you something that I have never told anyone in full. Not my sister. Not my therapist, though she came close to prying it out of me once. Not even my closest friend, Donna, who has known me for 30 years and thinks she knows everything there is to know about me. There is a child in this world who came from my body. She is 24 years old now, and she calls another woman Mom. I don't say that to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because I think there are more women like me than the world is willing to admit. Women who made a choice or had a choice made for them and then spent the next 2 decades quietly carrying it. Women who learn to smile at baby showers. Women who flinch, just for a half second, when they hear a certain name. Women who walk past photographs on refrigerators and keep walking, because stopping is the dangerous part. I want to tell you how it happened. All of it. The beginning, the middle, the part I'm not proud of, and the place I've managed to find my way to, not peace exactly, but something close enough to live with. It was 1999. I was 39 years old and I had already given up on the idea of having a child. I'd been married once, briefly, in my early 30s. A quiet, polite disaster of a marriage that ended without much drama and left me with a small settlement, a storage unit full of furniture I didn't want, and the growing suspicion that I was simply not built for the kind of life other women seemed to want naturally. I wasn't unhappy. I need you to understand that. I had a job I was good at. I worked in hospital administration, scheduling and billing, not glamorous but steady. I had my house. I had Donna and a few other friends. I had a garden in the backyard where I grew tomatoes every summer, and I was genuinely, quietly satisfied with most of it. And then I met Daniel. He was a contractor. He came to redo the floors in my kitchen. The old linoleum had been lifting at the corners for years, and I'd finally decided to do something about it. He was 42, broad-shouldered, with laugh lines around his eyes, and a way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered. We talked for 3 hours the first day he came to look at the job. I made him coffee. He stayed long past when he needed to. We were together for 8 months. It was the kind of relationship that has its own weather, warm and cloudy and occasionally stormy, always interesting. He was divorced too, with 2 teenage sons he saw every other weekend. He was funny and kind, and he made me feel, for the first time in a long time, like I was someone worth choosing. And then, in March of 2000, I found out I was pregnant. I remember sitting on the edge of the bathtub with the test in my hand. The house was quiet. It was a Saturday morning. The light was gray and thin through the window. I just sat there for a long time, not crying, not panicking, just very, very still. I was 40 years old. I had not planned this. I was not in a stable, committed relationship with a man who had said anything at all about a future together. I had fibroids that my doctor had been monitoring for 2 years. I had a mortgage and a job and a life that was organized around being alone. And I felt, in that bathroom, in that strange gray light, something I was completely unprepared for. I felt happy. Not relieved, not calm, not cert. Happy. A warm, irrational, almost frightening happiness that rose up through me like something I had been holding underwater for years and had finally let go. I called Daniel that afternoon. The silence on the phone, I can still hear it. It wasn't a cruel silence. It wasn't angry. It was the silence of a man who was suddenly, visibly drowning. He said he needed time to think. He came over that evening. He sat at my kitchen table, the new kitchen floor beneath us, the floor he had laid with his own hands, and he told me, carefully, honestly, that he didn't think he could do it again, that his boys were almost grown and he had been looking forward to a life without the weight of full parenthood, that he cared about me deeply, that he was sorry. I told him I understood. I meant it mostly. He offered to help financially. He said he would be involved however I wanted. He was not a bad man, he was just a frightened one. For the next month I lived in a strange, suspended state. I went to work. I tended my garden. I sat on my porch in the evenings and watched the neighborhood and tried to imagine what my life would look like with a baby in it. At 40, alone, with no family nearby except my sister Carol in Ohio, who already had 3 kids and a full life of her own. I made lists. I am a practical woman. I have always dealt with emotion through logistics. I made lists of what I would need, what I could afford, what kind of daycare situations existed near my house. I called my insurance. I talked to my supervisor quietly to understand what maternity leave I had available. And then, sometime in May, I called a social worker. Not because I had decided anything. I told myself I was just gathering information, just wanting to understand all the options. I was a responsible person. Responsible people gathered information. Her name was Wanda. She was a soft-spoken black woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the kind of calm that only comes from having heard everything. She sat across from me in her office and asked me questions, not leading questions, not pressuring questions, just thoughtful, open ones. What did I have? What did I need? What was I afraid of? I told her I was afraid of doing it badly. She looked at me for a moment over her glasses. She said, "Most people who are afraid of doing it badly end up doing it very well." I went home and cried for about 2 hours. Then I made more lists. My pregnancy was not difficult physically. My fibroids behaved. I was tired and a little nauseous through the summer, but nothing that stopped me from working, from living. By September, I was visibly pregnant, and people at work had started giving me that particular soft smile, the one that assumes everything is wonderful and planned and wanted in the expected way. I smiled back. I didn't explain. Daniel came to one of my prenatal appointments in October. He sat in the waiting room and held my coat while I went in. He was trying. I appreciated it, and I resented it in equal measure, which is probably honest. I had not made a decision. I kept not making it. Every time I thought I had reached some clarity, something would shift. I'd feel her move, a firm little pressure against the inside of my ribs, and the idea of putting her in someone else's arms became unbearable. Then I'd lie awake at 3 in the morning running numbers in my head, childcare costs, my own aging parents who would need me eventually, the loneliness of doing it all alone, and the idea of keeping her would seem impossibly selfish, like bringing a small person into a situation that was already strained at the seams. I bought a crib in November. I set it up in the spare bedroom. I painted the room a very pale yellow, not pink, not blue, just warm and neutral and open. I sat in the rocking chair I'd bought at a garage sale and rocked in the yellow room and didn't decide anything. I gave her a name. I know they tell you not to. The social worker, Wanda, had said it gently. She said it can make things harder for you later. I gave her one anyway. I called her Clara. I don't know why. It just felt right. It felt like her. She was born on the 14th of January, 2001. It was a Tuesday. It had snowed the night before, and the roads were still slick in the morning when my sister Carol, who had driven up from Ohio the week before to stay with me, loaded my bag into her car, and drove me to the hospital with careful, tense hands on the wheel. The labor was long, 15 hours. At some point in the middle of the night, when things got hard, Carol held my hand and didn't say much. She just held on, which was exactly right. Clara was born at 4:47 in the morning in the deep quiet hour before dawn. She weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces. She had dark hair plastered flat against her head, and her eyes were unfocused, and she made a sound, not quite a cry, more a surprised, indignant comment about the whole situation, and I laughed. I actually laughed. Out loud in the delivery room, exhausted and shaking and overwhelmed, I laughed at my daughter. They placed her on my chest. She was warm and damp and absolutely real in a way that nothing had prepared me for. I had spent 9 months turning this into a question, a problem, a logistics exercise, and here she was, not a question at all. Just a person. Just Clara. I had 4 days in the hospital. 4 days where she was mine in the most complete, uncomplicated way. Where I fed her and held her and learned the map of her face, the small C. Reese across her nose, the way her upper lip curved, the way she startled at sudden sounds and then settled, trusting, back into sleep. I signed the papers on the morning of the 5th day. Wanda was there. She had been quiet and steady through all of it, never pushing. She sat beside me at a small table in a hospital conference room, and I read every word of the document twice while she waited. I asked 2 clarifying questions. She answered them clearly. I signed my name. My hand did not shake. I have always been slightly ashamed of that. It seems like it should have shaken. Carol was in the waiting room. When I came out, she stood up immediately and opened her arms, and I walked into them and stood there for a very long time. She didn't say anything. What would you say? The family who was taking Clara, I knew almost nothing about them. I had requested very little information, which was a choice I later came to regret and then, much later, to understand. I knew they were in their early 30s. I knew they had been waiting for 2 years. I knew they lived somewhere in New England. I knew they had asked for an open adoption arrangement, which meant there could be contact, eventually, if everyone agreed, if the child wanted it, when she was old enough. I went home that afternoon in Carol's car. The spare room still had the yellow walls. The crib was still there. I left it there for 3 months before I could dismantle it. I went back to work after 6 weeks. People assumed I had lost the pregnancy or that there had been a health problem, something quiet and sad that they shouldn't ask about. I let them assume. It was easier than the truth, which was a truth they wouldn't have known where to put. The grief was not what I expected. I expected it to be sharp and clear, a wound with a shape. Instead, it was diffuse and weightless, like a fog that settled over everything without touching anything directly. I was functional. I ate. I slept, more or less. I tended my garden when spring came. I did my job well. But everything had a slight remove to it, like I was watching my own life through tinted glass. Colors were a little less saturated. Sounds were a little more muffled. I would be in the middle of perfectly ordinary moments, standing in the grocery store or having lunch with Donna, and suddenly feel this drop, this hollow lift in my chest, like an elevator that starts moving before you're ready for it. I didn't talk about it. What would I say, and to whom? The people who knew, Carol, Daniel, Wanda, all had the careful, watchful look of people who were waiting for me to be okay so they could stop worrying. I didn't want to be the reason people worried, so I was okay. Or I was a very convincing version of it. Daniel and I ended, gently, that spring. There was no argument, no dramatic conclusion. We just quietly stopped. He sent me a card on Mother's Day that year, a plain card, just his name inside, no message. I stood in my kitchen holding it for a long time, then I put it in a drawer. I don't know if I've forgiven him or not. I think forgiveness is a process you do in increments over years, and I am still working on it. The first letter came when Clara was 2 years old. Wanda had helped me set up the arrangement, the adoptive family, whose names I now knew were Robert and Susan, had agreed to send photographs and a letter once a year. They didn't have to. They wanted to. The letter arrived in March. It was written by Susan, neat, careful handwriting on cream-colored stationery, 4 pages long. She described Clara's personality, already curious, already fierce, already with opinions about everything. She included 3 photographs. Clara at 2 years old, dark curls, the same crease across her nose that I had memorized in the hospital, laughing at something out of frame. I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time with those photographs in my hands, and then I got up and I put one on the refrigerator. I don't know exactly why. It felt necessary. It felt like bearing witness to something. That photograph has been there ever since, updated every year or two as new ones arrived. And that is how I came to know Clara's life from the outside, in annual letters, in photographs, in the careful, generous dispatches from a woman who was raising my daughter, and who seemed to understand that sending these was an act of kindness I would not have known to ask for. I want to tell you about Susan because Susan is the complicated part of this story, the part that took me the longest to make sense of. When the letters first started coming, I read them with a feeling I can only describe as supervised grief. Susan's voice in those letters was warm, specific, full of real detail. She wrote about Clara the way you write about someone you know deeply and love without reservation. She noted the small things, that Clara refused to eat anything orange, that she had a stuffed rabbit she called Rabbit with Start. Ling pragmatism, that she had started trying to read before she started kindergarten by memorizing the text of books read to her, and then pretending to decode the words. I recognized things in those descriptions, the pragmatism with names, the early reading, the opinions about food. These were things that felt familiar in ways I couldn't quite explain and couldn't quite claim. And I hated Susan for it. Not constantly, not consciously for a long time, but underneath the gratitude, and I was genuinely grateful, I need to be clear about that, there was a slow, steady current of something much darker. She had what I had given away. She had the everyday, the ordinary, the Tuesday morning before school and the Halloween costume and the first loose tooth. She had the presents. She had the title. I had the photograph on the refrigerator. For years I told myself the feeling was just grief, just loss, the natural aftermath of a sacrifice. And that was true, partly. But there was something else in it too, something smaller and less dignified than grief. There was jealousy. There was resentment. And underneath those, something I am most ashamed of, there were moments in the middle of the night when I thought things about Susan that I would not repeat, that she hadn't earned it, that she didn't deserve it. That Clara was mine, and this was a mistake I had made that I couldn't undo. I carried those thoughts quietly and privately for years, the way you carry something shameful, at the bottom of the bag, under everything else, hoping no one asks you to empty your pockets. Clara turned 12, and that year Susan's letter was longer than usual. Clara had started asking questions. Susan wrote it plainly and honestly, which I respected. She wrote that Clara had known she was adopted since she was very young. They had always been open about it, which was what I had hoped for, but that at 12, the questions had become more specific. Who was she? What did she look like? Was she healthy? Did she wonder about Clara? Susan wrote, she asked me if you think about her. I told her I believed you did. I read that line 4 or 5 times. She asked me if you think about her. I sat at my kitchen table in the particular quiet of a Saturday afternoon, the light coming through the window at a low November angle, the radiators just starting up for the season, and I thought about a 12-year-old girl in New England with dark curls asking whether her birth mother thought about her. And then I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I cried. Not the careful, managed kind, the other kind. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and doesn't apologize for itself. I wrote back to Susan for the first time. In 11 years I had never written back. I had received their letters but never responded, which was my right under the arrangement, but which, writing now, I think was also a kind of hiding. I wrote 2 pages. I told her that yes, I thought about Clara every day. I thanked her, and I meant it in a way that felt different than it had before, less obligatory, more real. I told her that if Clara ever wanted to have contact, when she was old enough to decide for herself, I would welcome it. Susan wrote back within a week. That was the beginning of the second chapter of this story, and also the most difficult one. We exchanged emails for about a year. Susan and I carefully at first, then gradually with more ease, 2 women circling the same person from very different distances, trying to figure out what we were to each other. She was, I want to be honest about this, nothing like what I had imagined. I had imagined her, when I let myself imagine her at all, as a kind of archetype. Pleasant, stable, perhaps a little bland. The sort of steady, competent person to whom good things went without much drama. The Susan in the emails was funny. She was wry and self-deprecating and occasionally said things that surprised me. She wrote about her own fears as a mother with a candor that disarmed me. She wrote once about a particular fight she and Clara had when Clara was 13. A real blowout about something small that became something large in the way adolescent arguments do. And she wrote about it with the kind of rueful, helpless honesty that I recognized as the mark of someone who loved their child more than they needed to be right about anything. I found myself liking her, genuinely, against my will at first and then less reluctantly over time. And that was the confrontation, though it didn't look like one from the outside. The confrontation was internal. It happened in the privacy of my own kitchen and my own mind over the course of months. I had spent years holding Susan at the center of a grief that had nowhere else to go. She was the safe target for everything I couldn't direct at the situation itself or at myself. And now here she was an actual person, not a symbol. A woman who had spent 13 years loving my daughter and who was now, carefully and generously, including me in the edges of that love. I had to give up the resentment. Not because it was wrong to have had it, I think it was probably inevitable, probably human, but because it was no longer serving anything. It was a crutch I had been leaning on without realizing, and I had to put it down and figure out how to stand on my own. It was not a single moment. It was not a conversation or a revelation. It was more like a long, slow exhale, letting something go that you've been holding so long your hands have taken its shape. Clara turned 16, and she wrote to me herself. I received her email on a Wednesday morning at work. I almost missed it because it came through the contact information Susan had given me years earlier and I'd half forgotten I'd set it up. The subject line was just my name, Patricia. I read it twice in the bathroom with the door locked. She wrote that she had been thinking about writing for a long time and that she kept starting and stopping because she wasn't sure what to say. She said she didn't want me to feel like she was unhappy or that anything was wrong because nothing was wrong, her life was good and her parents. She used the word parents naturally and without apology, and I was glad she did. Her parents were wonderful. She said she just wanted to know me. Not in place of her family, not to replace anything, just in addition to everything. She said she had always known she had 2 mothers, in a way, just one who raised her and one who was somewhere out there, and she wanted the somewhere out there one to have a face and a voice. She said, I know this might be strange for you. It's strange for me too, but I figure strange and right can be the same thing sometimes. I called Donna that evening and read her the email over the phone, and my voice broke about halfway through, which meant that Donna now knew everything, finally, after 30 years. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she said, Pat, you have to write her back. I said, I know. She said, tonight. I said, I know. I wrote Clara back that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold while I was writing, and I wrote her 4 paragraphs that took me 2 hours. I told her she was right, that strange and right could absolutely be the same thing. I told her she had been thought of every day for 16 years. I told her that I had a photograph of her on my refrigerator and that I had watched her grow up in photographs and letters and that she had always been, in her own way, present in my life. I told her she could ask me anything. We started talking. Not constantly, we were careful with each other, the way you are when something is new and fragile and you don't want to press too hard. Emails at first. Then, that summer, a phone call. I remember I was in the garden when she called. It was July, the tomatoes coming in, and I'd stepped inside to get a glass of water and my phone lit up with her number. The number she had texted me the week before, just sending it, saying no pressure. I picked up on the second ring. I said hello. And she said, "Hi, this is Clara." And then she laughed a little nervous and said, "Obviously, you know that." I laughed too, "I know that." And then there was a small, suspended pause, not an uncomfortable one, just a moment of both of us standing at the edge of something large, and then we started talking. And we talked for an hour and 40 minutes about nothing of consequence and everything of consequence simultaneously. She was funny. She had the same laugh as someone I couldn't quite place for a long time, and then I realized it was my own. She had my laugh. I stood in my kitchen after we hung up and I put my hand over my mouth and I stood there like that for a while. Not crying, just holding something. Some new version of an old fact, one that had changed shape. The thing I want to tell you about the meeting, because yes, we met eventually, when she was 17, a year after the first phone call, is that it was not the way I had imagined it, in any of the versions I had rehearsed in my head over the years. It was ordinary. Robert and Susan drove her down to meet me in Pittsburgh. They offered to stay or to leave, and I said I thought leaving was probably better for everyone, and Susan looked at me with that direct, calm look I had come to recognize from our emails and said, "I agree, call us when you're done." And she hugged Clara briefly, and then they went to a coffee shop down the street. I had picked a small, quiet restaurant, not too formal, not too casual. I was there 20 minutes early, and I sat at the table with a glass of water and my hands in my lap, and I thought, this is the most nervous I have ever been in my life, and that is including the morning I signed the papers. She came in and I recognized her immediately. Of course I did. I had been watching her grow up in Fotogra. PHS for 17 years. And yet seeing her in person was something photographs had not prepared me for, the way she moved, the tilt of her head, the specific alive quality of her presence in a room. She saw me and she stopped for just a moment in the doorway. Then she smiled. That smile, the one from the photograph on my refrigerator, the one she'd been giving me for 17 years without knowing, and she came over to the table. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. She sat down, we looked at each other. "This is so weird," she said. "It is very weird," I agreed. She laughed, I laughed. And then we ordered lunch and we talked for 3 hours and nothing was resolved and everything was exactly as it needed to be. I want to be honest about something, because this story has no clean ending and I don't want to give you one. Clara and I have a relationship now. It is careful and ongoing and real. She is 24 years old. She is in her second year of graduate school in environmental science, which surprises me and also doesn't somehow. She visits sometimes. We text. She sends me photographs of things she finds beautiful. She calls me Patricia, not Mom, not anything awkward, just my name, which is exactly right. Susan and I have a relationship too. It is different from what either of us expected it to be. We have had long phone calls and one weekend visit that was strange and moving in equal parts. She is someone I respect deeply and am occasionally still jealous of in ways that I have learned to observe in myself without acting on. I think that is probably the most honest thing I can tell you. The jealousy hasn't disappeared. It has just lost most of its power. It is a small, occasional thing now, like a scar that tightens in cold weather. Noticeable but not disabling. What has changed is this. I have stopped thinking of what happened as a mistake I made. For a long time, for most of 2 decades, that was how I carried it. A mistake, a failure of courage or imagination or both, something I had done wrong. I don't think that anymore. Not because I think it was easy or painless or that I would recommend it to anyone, but because I can look at Clara now, at who she is, at the life she has, at the mother she has in Susan, and the father she has in Robert, and the whole rich, specific life she was given, and I can say, with some real difficulty and some real honesty, I gave her something I couldn't give her at that time, in that year, in that life I was living. I gave her a family. I gave her continuity and stability, and 2 parents who had wanted her fiercely for years before she arrived. I gave her the kind of grounded beginning that I, at 40 years old and alone and frightened, could not have given her. And I kept something too, not her, I'm not trying to rewrite what happened, but I kept the knowledge of her. I kept the photograph on the refrigerator. I kept myself available through all of it so that when she was ready to find me, I was findable. Here is what I know now, after 63 years, that I wish I had known at 40. Loving someone does not require possessing them. Some of the deepest love in a human life is the kind that lets go. Not because letting go is painless. It is not. It is never painless. But because sometimes the most complete expression of love is to put someone else's wholeness ahead of your own need for them. I am not saying this in a neat, tidy way, as if I figured it out serenely and everything resolved itself into wisdom. I arrived at this conclusion through years of grief and lists, and late nights and jealousy, and small acts of bitterness I'm not proud of, and long, hard conversations with myself in this quiet house with its clanking radiators and its yellow spare bedroom that I eventually painted sage green and turned into a proper guest room. I arrived here slowly and imperfectly, the way most real things are arrived at. And what I want to say to you, whether you are a woman who has made a choice like mine, or a woman who is thinking about it, or a woman who gave up a child and thinks about it every day but has never told a single person, or just someone watching this who recognized something in this story that they couldn't quite name. You are not alone in this. You are not the only one who has walked past a photograph and kept walking. You are not the only one who named something you weren't supposed to name. You are not the only one who signed a paper with a steady hand, while something inside you was anything but steady. And if you are still in the middle of your version of this, still in the fog, still doing the logistics, still trying to be okay for everyone around you, I want you to know that the fog does lift. Not all at once, not on any schedule, but slowly, over time, and with enough honesty and enough patience with yourself, it lifts. I am proof of that. I am sitting in this kitchen, in this house, with this photograph on my refrigerator, and I am 60. 3 years old, and I am still learning how to carry this thing I have been carrying for more than 2 decades. But I am carrying it upright, finally. And some days, more than I would have thought possible, more than I thought I deserved, the carrying feels almost like grace. If this story moved you, if something in it reached you, please share it with someone you think might need to hear it, not because I need the views, but because I think there are more women like me than anyone talks about, more quiet kitchens, more photographs on refrigerators. And the thing about quiet is that it can begin to feel like solitude, and solitude can begin to feel like shame, and shame can last a very long time if no one ever tells you that you are not the only one. You are not the only one.